If you're, I suggest you press ahead with the pocket park and get what's been started and talked about for many years, and that we press ahead with the plan as is.
Thank you for that. Going back to what Michael said about what it's going to be, I'd like to say what it is now. It is being used by the local community. It is being used very, regularly for community events. I think they've got a couple that are going to be going on very shortly, but they have had them, perhaps pre-COVID, but everything had to close down during that time. I think that area is at risk if we do not designate it as a protected green space. And I really think that we should, in the light that we added a small green space in front of Simpson's Greenfield Mill, we've just added that because we had it in the consultation. Somebody wanted it to go in, so we put it in. We as a group decided that here it's also in the consultation as being requested. We as a group are quite rightly able to put that in. That's what I can't understand. We've put in an extra piece of land through one person suggesting it. Here, a group of people suggested it. And yet we made the comment that we didn't feel that it should become a local green space. That's what I can't understand.
I think I can possibly help with that, Alice, in terms of it was your mother that suggested
Simpsons Mill.
Yeah. And if you remember, across on the other side of town by the Whitesides roundabout, there is almost a mirroring site that's just got a bench on it. One of them's been stolen. And Claire Bradley at the time remarked, this is a gateway site. It's a gateway into Cone. That's really the purpose of this site. So it's actually sort of different in the way that it's demonstrably special. That's probably how I would understand it. I'll be interested to hear what Michael says.
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head with that one. All I can really sort of repeat is that, yes, these are judgment calls, and the expectation of national policies that this will not be suitable for all sites. We could probably, we could go back to the long list if we wanted, and try and have all of those as local green spaces. But I take your point about, the importance of the consultation. But again, when it comes down to planning judgments, it's not about how many make the point or who shouts loudest. It's about how that space relates to those national designation criteria. I think what we also need to be mindful of, that if we start trying to push this too far, I think it does go to the sort of credibility of the plan and what we're doing. I think we have been quite judicious in the sites we've sought to designate, and I think we should stick to that approach. This site is not unprotected; it's protected, as I've said before, through other parts of the development plan.
Okay, so are we going to, unless we take advice from our officer in terms of sort of whether we determined it before, that is a point that I look to you for before we perhaps move to a vote.
I mean, obviously originally when we're looking at green spaces, and we brought the ones forward that we thought, like you said, Jerry had done a long list. and we've been through that process. Obviously, this wasn't one of the sites that came up at the time. I do take Alice's comment on board that someone has brought it up during the regulation 14 and suggests that it should be added as a local green space. But then I think we also have to take the advice of, you know, the specialists that we've brought in who've done countless neighbourhood plans before, as to whether it meets the criteria or not.
But you don't feel that in these minutes here, which was our June meeting, that we decided? Because, you know, one reading of it suggests that we did.
During that meeting, we had stated that we didn't want to delay the plan and repeat the Regulation 14 consultation.
Which we wouldn't have to do with this, would we? No.
And I'm trying to think if Essex Street was actually discussed during that meeting. If it was, I think the decision was to go ahead with the plan as it was. But I'm not sure if it was discussed at the meeting.
Sorry, can I? Yeah, I put forward the new wording for Essex Street. However, it wasn't allowed to be at that meeting because it had to go to another meeting. And then I think we went into other things about lenches. And so we wouldn't have voted for it, obviously, and I would have been speaking about it as I'm speaking now. And that certainly didn't happen. Also, if we've not got the actual minutes of it actually being discussed, then I propose that we do include it in the neighbourhood plan as a protected green space.
Okay. And
Chair.
Yep.
Chair, may I just point out that it's surely a matter of fact that can be checked because it was a recorded meeting, was it not?
Yes, it was an extraordinary meeting.
In the paper, there's a paper from the summons which has item 5, and it talks about all the green spaces there, and it's got a list of the ones that were in at the moment and a whole series of others to be considered. You know, Greenfield Mill, Gibb Hill, Lenches, Essex Street, the Pocket Park, Dewhurst Street and Notts Lane Community Garden. So it was there as item 5. What do the minutes say about item 5?
Well, the minutes say, members discussed the pros and cons of the neighbourhood plan progressing for protecting Cone and the green spaces within the area, and noted that the neighbourhood plan is a living document that can be amended and added to after it has been adopted. The consultant, employed by Cone Town Council, advised the council that the plan should progress as it is, and if the plan was to go back to Regulation 14, at best this will delay the plan by 9 months, and at worst the plan would never come to fruition. Slightly muddies the waters, of course, because this site wouldn't need it to go back to Regulation 14. But it does seem to close the door. I don't know. I'll take an interpretation on that from Gina.
The actual decision was made at the following meeting, wasn't it, I think? So I would suggest looking at the minutes for the following meeting, and if that says that we agreed to go ahead as is, then I would suggest that that's what we should do.
Okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. We discussed it and we've got all the arguments out now. Perhaps Gina could look at this while we deal, or Nathan could look at this, just to be certain one way or another, and then we can be getting on with the rest of this meeting. So just parking item 7. So landscape assessment, there were, sorry.
Sorry, have we discussed Gib Hill? Was
Yes, we
that-
discussed Gib Hill. Gib Hill is too large, isn't it?
Well, it's 17 hectares. What do we consider as too large? My concern is that at the moment, Gib Hill has no protection. And if we don't mention it, then it's not going to have the protection it needs. Okay, the borough have promised to have it protected, but if we don't mention it in our plans as a protected green space, we run the risk of it having those houses on it that's been prepared by Pendle in the local plan. I'm just concerned that we've not got the protection it needs. And it's not that vast an area. Because if it's going to become, I know people are saying it's not about what it's going to become, but if it's going to become a nature reserve, which I feel that that's what it's scheduled to be, if we don't acknowledge that in some way in our plan, we might run the risk of it not being, but that is in my view.
For me, this one's far more clear cut. The site, Gib Hill, fails that national designation test because it is an extensive tract of open land. Again, it's not unprotected because it is protected through various policies in the core strategy and the local plan. My view on this one is, even if you wanted to put it in the neighbourhood plan as a designated local green space, I think Pendle would object very strongly. And I think, based on my experiences when neighbourhood plans have reached independent examination stage, even if Pendle were willing to let it get that far, I think the examiner, he or she, would conclude that it fails the not an extensive tract of open land test. I think the concern about development pressure, I think that's better. I think you're better advised pursuing that, as you have done as a town council, through the local plan part 2 process. You've made a representation on that, and that representation says that that site shouldn't be allocated, and I think you'd be best advised that that's how you pursue that, but certainly not by designating Gib Hill as a local green space. I just think it's a... If you were vetting my own...
Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to make the point that we need to be very, very careful about Gib Hill and making sure that we do put as much as we can into protecting it. I don't think that there is the protection in the local plan. I think that Pendle has very clearly said in the local plan that they don't want it protected, and it's only councillors, many of whom are here, that have fought for it not to be designated as housing. So there isn't that protection in the local plan. But I appreciate that, yes, it probably is a large tract of land. But so, unfortunately, are some of the others that we're putting forward. And again, I'm not sure I will cope with that, but that's the situation.
I don't think there's anything else that's 17.5 hectares. We don't want to be drawing the ire of the inspector by putting something that's described as a long shot in our plan.
Yeah, I'm quite,
I think you're absolutely right, Alice, in terms of it's protected for development by Pendle as a reserve site in their local plan part 2. Of course, we made representations very strongly against it as a town council, and I do not think, after the furore that was caused and the undertakings that many councillors made, that would come forward anymore. So, for example, it's been taken out of the Nelson town deal, for which £25 million was given by the government to make Nelson a better place. None of us felt that Nelson would be a better place for building on Gib Hill. So if the protected for development designation comes out of the actually adopted local plan part 2, then it is just, even without any other action or potentially becoming a nature reserve, which is what's being discussed, no more than that, then it just becomes land within open countryside. And obviously, our plan and the local plan part 2 does not support building on land within open countryside. Now, we had a case that came forward at P&R this week that was land adjacent to the settlement boundary. And because we haven't got a local plan part 2, that is allowed. And it's only allowed as long as we don't have a local plan part 2. So what is clear from that is that this, developers are using this gap to bring forward planning applications that would not succeed if we had a local plan part 2. So what we need to do, either as a neighbourhood plan group, where we can, or as borough councillors getting involved in the local plan, is make sure that both of those come forward, that there is a local plan part 2, so you can't speculatively pick off land adjacent to the settlement boundary, and there is a neighbourhood plan for Cone. And we are all doing our best to move that forward. Anyway, I see that in the hiatus of discussing Gib Hill, that Gina has consulted the minutes.
Yes, the actual decision was taken to the following full council meeting. And in those minutes, it states that we'd agreed to continue with the plan in the current timeline and take it to Regulation 15 when it was ready.
So your interpretation of that?
My interpretation of that was that we were continuing as planned. But then also making the adjustment for the Regulation 14 consultation to get it ready for submission to Pendle Borough Council.
All right, so would you, as our officer, allow the vote on Essex Street?
The decision that was made was not to delay the plan and to just work with the current timelines. Given that this site wouldn't delay the plan, I think it's up to the group to consider whether they want to include it or not.
All right, splendid. Okay, so you've made the proposal. I'm guessing you have a seconder. Okay, so all those in favour of putting Essex Street in the neighbourhood plan? Okay, and those that are against? I don't think that Kevin has a vote. No. So I would ask that you just describe it as it is now, and don't talk about the future. And obviously make sure that everything is with Gina. Yeah? So that we can move that on. Yeah. Okay, so landscape assessment. You rightly pointed out that the big junction by the Duke of Lancaster had big vans in it, yeah. And rather amusingly, we found a photographer to take pictures, and guess what happened? So we got the lower views that are very good, aren't they? Lower down Albert Road, we're happy with those, but asked that the top ones, you're not looking happy? No? Oh,
No. Yeah.
that the top ones are redone at a time of day when there aren't vans. So we're nearly there. Yeah. So we've got half of all the new pictures. I have gone through the whole thing again with a printed copy and made lots of little teensy changes on things, and she's implemented all of those. So we're poised to have what will be the final version. And please, while I think of it, could I ask that you send that to Way and Katie, because we discussed it when they came this week, last week.
Karen actually sent me an email to say she was going to try and go out early in the morning. This was yesterday or the day before. I haven't had anything sent through, but the consultant did say as soon as we get those, if we send them through, then she can drop those into the plan.
Okay.
So I suggest when we get that, then I'll send that to Wayne once the new images are in.
Yeah, perfect.
Chair, if someone can tell me exactly what the images are, I may have some without transport on them.
They are super specific. They are standing in this location with this lens, with that, aren't they, Nathan? So we have hired someone to do exactly that. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to just make a comment, if I may, about the mapping which I notice has got arrows added. It was discussed, I think, at the last meeting. And I just wonder if that, in its current form, is sufficient to be as usable as it might be. I'm thinking in terms of further down the line, if this document is part of the development advice, if you will, for Colne, and I'm just looking at it from the point of view of somebody seeking to understand and use that information. I'm not sure whether I find it a little confusing in areas. I mean, with those kind of diagrams, generally the ones I've come across have more of a sort of cone of vision for each view rather than an arrow here and an arrow there. And I noticed there are some which have a single arrow, and I'm not quite sure, how it works, and there didn't seem to be anything to explain it. So I'm just asking that that's reviewed in terms of usability and clarity, that's all.
Thank you for that. And obviously you've seen documents like this before, and I haven't. This is the first one I've seen. So it's a bit like Frederick in The Pirates of Penzance falling in love with the ugly shipmate. He didn't even know that she was ancient. So I'm assuming that our long-range views analysis are not like that. I'm assuming that they are much better than Frederick's first love. But we can ask about the sort of cone, can we?
Yeah. Yeah, I can give you feedback to Jenny and see if she can have a look and maybe come up with the alternative.
I think the other point there is that, and I meant to bring my laptop with me and I rushed out to the office without it, so I can't refer to it now. But I don't think there's any distinction between, for example, whether a view is a panoramic view out or whether it's the important view of the town hall from distant views, which are two different things. One is more of a sort of silhouette against a skyline. The other is, a panoramic view. And I'm not wishing to overcomplicate it, but I'm just wondering if there is the intent that there is a distinction there, because if there is, that doesn't come across, well, it didn't come across to me.
Okay, so just to be clear, you want to have a full understanding of whether it's a one-way thing or a two-way thing, and also how wide it needs to be. Does it encompass a ridge view, or does it encompass a small viewpoint?
the width you're interested in as well?
Well, there is an indication on the, I mean, Michael will probably, I think Michael's probably had some liaison with the other consultant on this, I don't know, but he may wish to comment, but there is some indication on width of view, I think, with the, you know, there's an arrow this way and an arrow that way, and that angle varies between different views, but it's just that consideration as to whether, you know, for instance, I would have thought, if I was looking at a diagram like that, and I may be completely wrong, but if there's a single arrow, I would be thinking, oh, well, that's just a single point in the distance or whatever that's the important view,
As opposed to
rather than a panoramic cone of vision. But it wasn't quite clear to me what, in that context, because I couldn't see, surely there must be views in that are important of the likes of this building and the parish church on the crest of the hill, rather than just the general panorama. I don't know. I'm only asking the question.
Other than providing Jenny with 3 or 4 examples from elsewhere, which were actually maps in final neighbourhood plans rather than maps in technical reports, I think Paul's feedback best relayed to Jenny, because I think at the end of the day, you need to have something that is standardised across the document, and it gives people a clear indication of what that view is showing. So yeah, I just think, yeah, it probably needs to go back to her.
Okay, I think the most pragmatic response here is that Gina's been making lots of notes, and I've come back to you for clarification. But I actually think the best thing to do would be if you spoke directly to Jenny and were able to send the whole of the Neighbourhood Plan Advisory Committee a sort of synopsis of what she thought, or she is able to do that. Because she might say, yes, I see what you're saying, or she might say, actually, there's a really good technical reason why this doesn't happen within neighbourhood plans, and then at least we all know. To me, what you're saying is perfectly reasonable, but I'm not an expert on this. And she might have a particular reason why, oh no, it's always done this way, inspectors expect it, or something like that, I don't know. Are you happy to take that forward?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to her. What I would suggest is that Gina forwards the comments from the meeting.
So she's prepared.
First, and then asks her to contact me to discuss when she's had a review of that.
Happy with that?
Yeah, I can do that. I can give the feedback, and then suggest if she wants to talk to you, then I can give her your number.
Okay, moving on. So the design code. Last week, some of you know that we had a little walkabout just on the main road and the immediate vestigial offs. And then we got in my car before she died again and did getting on for 2 hours driving round Peripheral Cone. And at the end, I just realised when Liz said that her bladder was failing, we've been over lots of speed bumps on the Poets Estate, that I forgot the main road to Fulridge. And I've sent them that as a separate view, haven't I, Gina? Because that's the one road that I forgot to do. So I hope that we have fully covered Peripheral Rural Cone, the different ages of suburban cone from the sort of 1910, the Edwardian section, the 1930s to 50s, so you'd call it mid-century section, and then 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s. And we discussed really how these various areas would be segmented. So in terms of the plan, There would be, you know, the core, which is, I remember when we first started this, we considered to do a series of concentric sausages to represent Cone and its various areas. This will be more sophisticated than that. It will probably be divided into between 6 and 8 zones, and those zones will be represented as what's typical for that zone. So, you know, one particular zone might be social housing of the early to mid 20th century, that might be a zone. Historic core, that might be a zone. Rural fringes, that's another zone. Late 20th century housing and early noughties housing estates, that's a zone. And so, well, and then the bulk of the terraced houses, the Victorian terraced houses, that would be another zone. So there would be all the analysis of the character features that are prevalent within those zones and the material palettes. Yes, Alice?
I'm really trying to get my head around the code design code. It seems to be another document that, is it superseding what we've already got, or is it,
No.
is it just adding to?
It's adding to.
Yeah, it seems to just be getting, it seems to be snowballing.
Well, what happened as we went out to Regulation 14, we had negative feedback from developers saying, yeah, none of this makes any sense. It's not specific enough. Same with the long-range views analysis. So this was in response to the fact that really our evidence base had seemed a little too vague. So this is now giving us the detail so that you can say, actually, if you're building, I don't know, I mentioned this at random, on Hill Lane in Cone, which would be rural fringe, then you are not looking at the same design guide that would be informing the centre of town, or, I don't know, Deerwood Park, because they would slot in different areas of our design code. And David and I have seen many design and access statements and material palette discussions from developers, and they look lovely and they sound really nice, but then you realise that a lot of the materials used are concrete. And if we are really thinking that it might be, we want our plan to be as ecological as possible, is concrete the de facto building material for the whole of Cone? Now, you could argue we cannot insist on stone everywhere or real slate everywhere, but we certainly can and should for certain parts of the town. And that will be made, that evidence base will be made a lot more secure by this extra work. Is that how you see it, Michael?
Yes, the impetus for design codes stems from government, and it's included within the National Planning Policy Framework. Indeed,
It's bigger than what new white paper might come forward.
Well, yeah, indeed, the National Planning Policy, the NPPF, was issued in a revised form last month, and if anything, that increases the policy pressure for improvements to design. It now includes the word beauty. How on earth that's going to be assessed when we get to planning applications?
It's Roger
Who knows?
Roger Scruton's design principles.
But in terms of the neighbourhood plan, as long as the design code is produced by the ACOM to a reasonable time scale, then what we agreed at the previous meeting was that it would be a subsidiary document that sits alongside the neighbourhood plan. So it's not replacing the neighbourhood plan, it would just be read in conjunction. And as Sarah said, because it's going to be divided into zones, the onus on people putting together planning applications, again, shouldn't be too great, because they should have a reasonable idea which zone that they should be looking at in the document. So, yeah, I think it's important that this work does move ahead and sits alongside the neighbourhood plan, because clearly, you know, as in terms of government policy, that's where things are headed.
Howard?
Two things. One, in the dim and distant past, when Pendle was in its infancy, they did have a, in inverted commas, materials policy, which very much, not as specific as this area, that area, but if the predominant materials were stone and slate and so on, that was to be there. But if it was a red brick estate from 1940s, 50s, it was acceptable for red brick there. So I think we're actually going back to something that existed, God help us, 40 years ago. And just as a matter of clarification, what are you calling the poet's estate?
Tennyson, Ruskin, give me more poets. All of those.
Yeah,
poets.
you mean Judge Fields and the bits around it?
Well, Judge isn't a poet, I'm guessing. And that's the newer bit, isn't it? Judge Fields. Browning.
And Coleridge come off
Yes.
it, so. Because the rest of it isn't the estate, because Wordsworth, etc., are terraced houses, as is Milton.
Well, we went up and down every single one of those
Yeah,
streets,
well,
I can't tell you.
It was just. It's not an estate in common parlance, shall we say?
Well,
local common parlance.
interestingly, I recently walked it with Lee Johnson, the tree officer at Pendle Borough Council, and he said this was conceived as like a little garden village. And over time, he showed me lots of, actually, had we known, green spaces that are hidden. And they don't have any trees on, they don't have any shrubs on, they don't have any benches on. So I suppose they wouldn't pass the test as well loved, but they're there. And he said, if you look at this, it was really fascinating. There were little crescents, there were wide verges, and he said trees have been lost on this estate. The vision of this estate has gone through disease, attrition, modern life, and you don't get, except in pockets now, the original concept. But he said there was an original concept for the poet's estate to be this garden village. So there is the opportunity in lots of places where we could put that back, not as part of the neighbourhood plan, but as perhaps part of the climate change emergency at Pendle Council. And we're looking at getting some grants for that. And perhaps it will become more homogenous at that point. But at the moment, it's only architecturally homogenous. It's not, the planting was intrinsic to it. Anyway, so design code, everybody happy? So next, the marketing prospectus. I've written a little section on fresh produce. I've asked for one of the interior pictures to be swapped out for another interior picture. And then the two random interior pictures that are just above sports towards the end, page 19, I think they'd be better as a cone panorama, that kind of thing. And Rebecca actually has, I sent her, what would you say at the beginning, 8 of them, 8 different panoramas. So I think that would be a better end piece, possibly a sunset. And there are quite a lot of those. So we couldn't use the visualization of the future redeveloped top of town, which is very sad, but there was no point pushing against a closed door. I still think it's a very persuasive and colourful and pleasant prospectus that shows the diversity of different housing sorts in Cone and the kinds of things that you can do and enjoy in Cone.
come in there, Chair. On page 4, local produce, it says local produce and there's 4 crosses. Is that because we love the local produce?
No,
or-
I've written a paragraph there.
Right,
Yeah,
thank you.
new paragraph. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, fairly minor comments, but firstly, I must admit, on the title page, or the cover of it, if you will, I do have an issue really with the place to live.
Okay.
I think Colne's brilliant, but the place to live, I think if you overstate your case, if you exaggerate your case, you undermine it. And I can't help thinking that, you know, the place to live, Colne, the place to live, is slightly overstating the intent. It's a difficult one because, you know, I tried brainstorming a few other thoughts and things like home sweet Colne, or, you know, Colne, your place to live, maybe, rather than the place to live. But, you know, it is difficult. No home like Colne. Anyway.
I was thinking that too.
But it's a difficult one to do, and I appreciate the difficulty. But I personally, when I read something like that on page 1, I've switched off by page 2 because I'm thinking there's going to be no substantiated argument in this document. It's just going to be superlative. So that's an observation. It's a very personal one, but take that as you will. On
Come
page
to Cone people have built their brand around characterful Cone. So perhaps we
well, it
could.
refers to character later, and I did wonder about character.
So perhaps we could tap into that, and I'll give it some
life, or
I'll
about living, isn't it?
Yeah.
Living in Colne. It's not just a thing about, because it's trying to draw people to want to live in Colne. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's the
and making Cone
emphasis.
the sort of uniqueness of it. I think.
Yes.
You know, Gina just said to me the same, and I thought the same thing just at the same moment. You know, a great place to live, which would fit on the same space. We'll give that some more thought, and we'll bring it back.
Yeah. I was really pleased to see the quaint language has gone, with one exception, and the bonny Colne. And I think that's a mistake, because actually it's backward looking. And
people do use it though, don't they?
But they do. People that live in Colne use it. But if you're trying to attract also people to come and live in Colne, it'll be lost on them and just look rather quaint. And I question the
where does it appear?
The wisdom of doing that. Is it? I've not got it in front of me. Is it page 2?
Yeah, people call it that though, don't they?
I know, but you could just say Colne on the hill.
Okay. What do people think about this? Do we think it's twee, or do we think, well?
No, I think it has been used for too long, and it's still. I'm trying to think where else I've seen it.
It's a song.
Yeah, and it crops up time and again in lots of places. I think if it said Bunny Corn on Phil, yeah, that's too far, but Bunny Corn on Phil is okay.
Chair, I'm not sure about Little Old Colne.
Where does that appear?
Just below Bonny Colne on the hill.
I mean, surely the thrust of this document is forward-looking, and I just feel that it sort of it competes with that. That's my view.
All right.
If I could just make one other, sorry, the clip art next to the titles throughout the document. Some of the shopping has, I'm going from memory now, it has a carrier bag clip art
Yes.
next to it with Colm on.
That is part of the
I know
character
that's-
will come to cone thing.
Yep, absolutely. But then I find it's inconsistent.
Okay.
There's one that's crept in under sport, which alerted me to what I conceive
Okay.
as a problem.
Okay.
Because I think that is the most god-awful bit of clip art you could imagine.
Right.
And I think there's an inconsistency in style. If you're going to have clip art like that, it wants to be consistent in style
Okay.
throughout the document, and preferably a little more stylish,
Okay.
I would suggest. But the other thing is, if you're going to have clip art next to some of those subtitles, should you not have it against all of them?
Yeah.
So that you have a graphic descriptor, if you like, next to each, not just next to some of them and not others. Personally, I'm not sure it really needs it at all, but you know, something tasteful and consistent, I would suggest if you do go down that route.
Okay. I'll feed that back.
Just going back to the Bonnicone on the hill, I don't think a heap of contradictions is perhaps the right.
Should we keep Bonnicone on the hill but in speech marks?
Yeah, or
And then change the text below? If Bonnicone on the hill is a song and a phrase, let's keep it there, but let's put it in speech marks. At least that way it's a phrase.
I think a heap of contradictions is a phrase, isn't it?
The more I read it, the less. Yeah.
Back to the drawing.
A mass?
You're all right up. It's all right up to Pennines. It's after that it sort of.
Okay. All right, we'll feed that back. Little tweaks.
Yeah, perhaps it's something like Cone is a town of contradictions and surprises.
I think a mass of contradictions. Okay. All right.
But can I just add, having been picky, I think it's looking very good.
Okay. So, site viability. I went on a webinar where I think I discussed this at full council, where we were featuring. However, the frustration from Michael's perspective and mine is that because we are the very first town in the country to have this new method, the very first town in the country to have the new method will probably be the longest, because they're setting the sort of baselines for, they've chosen 3 other towns. So there are 4 towns in total that will have this approach, and we're the first. So we're having the biggest amount of scrutiny. I've written them a polite letter, and Gina has today spoken to the chap that's in charge of this. And there is, through the frustrations of computers, there is actually some nice news. If you remember, we were wanting to have this MOT so that all the basic conditions are met, and that is seen by the experts as the basic conditions are met before we go to regulation 15. And Gina, you explain what happened.
Yeah, we had a small amount of grant that left that we were being urged to apply for by locality. So I went through the application process, and in the midst of it, there was a bit of a glitch, and it wouldn't let me go through the application until I actually put a design package, a technical package in.
We didn't want one.
We didn't want one.
We didn't want one.
We were just applying for grants. So in the end, I put something in to get through the application, and then I sent them a message straight after to say, even though I've put this in, we're not in a position for it yet, even though we do want it. So anyway, someone got back to me and said, oh, well, given that you do want it eventually anyway, she said, I'll pass it on to the team. And she said, I'll also pass your comments through. Anyway, the next day, someone rang me he's also included in the viability study as well, so he's heavily involved with that, and he knows. But he said, well, that's fine, it's not a problem. He said, we put it on hold for now, and he said, obviously I'll know when things are nearing completion, and he said, and then we can get going with it straight away when we're ready. So in essence, we won't have a delay in applying for it then, because it's already in the system. So.
And we've already heard that will be rapid. It's a very speedy process, is that. So that's something, it's an unexpected bonus. But meanwhile, there's nothing more we can do about the viability beyond prayer. We have done all that we can do, and it's in the hands of other people. So the item 12, which is the rewording of neighbourhood plan policies, over to Michael.
Yes, what I've started to do over the last few weeks is, where we can, make amendments to the Regulation 14 document. I think, as I said at the previous meeting, part of the problem that we have been sort of right at the end of the food chain is we're dependent on things like the landscape work, which obviously now is pretty much nearing completion, but certainly the viability and the design code. But I'm hoping that we can make enough progress on dealing with as many of the Regulation 14 comments as we can. I've revised the document to take account of the new version of the National Planning Policy Framework. It was published last month. And then there are various updates that need to be made to the supporting documents, such as the local green space report, the strategic environmental assessment will need reviewing, but again, I don't think that's a particularly significant change. The two other submission documents that accompany the plan are the basic condition statement and the consultation statement. So I've started to put those two together. I think what would be helpful from the town council side is if it's possible to sort of collate all the consultation materials that have been used over the last 2-3 years.
You've got that?
Yeah, we should have.
Whether they can be put on a disc or something, or...
So just any previous versions?
Yeah. I'm thinking more in terms of sort of leaflets, photos of public meetings, that sort of thing, because the consultation statement is an evidence-based document to show the lengths that you've gone through to meet the regulation requirements and the requirements of the Act. But if that could be put together, I can then sort of stitch it all together with the wording. So I'm hoping once we've got the sort of the viability and the design code out of the way, then we're pretty, we should be able to press.
I'm on the checking stage. Would be on the checking stage at that point.
Yeah.
So go on, Gina. You can see you're desperate to tell us more about the consultation.
Yeah, I can start putting a folder together. We have done screenshots of websites and stuff, and obviously there's a survey that we did, so we've got all the results of the survey and that kind of thing. So yeah, I can do that for you.
Marvellous. Okay. Work still to be completed. Well, after the brilliant wheeze that David had in the last meeting to make everybody else do all the addresses for all the points of the non-designated heritage assets, I've been cracking on with the non-designated heritage assets, and I have optimised all the photographs and sent them to David because he lays everything out. I have written a description of Alking Coates walled garden. I have started on Holy Trinity. That's going to be a magnum opus. I think there's going to be full page on that now. And I have done the Bethel Chapel. That leaves me with the Heritage Streets and Lidget and and the little theatre. So I'll just do them, really. And then I'm afraid that's a big job for David, because he has to redo the index and lay all those new properties out. Plush Lathe, of course, is going in, and out is coming the South Valley pumping house. I see they've already started demolishing it, or it doesn't look the same as the pictures that were taken. It is a shame. It's not the first thing to have disappeared. Didn't ever make it to the final plan. It's a shame. But I think the whole point of this is that that doesn't happen, and in the years ahead, we don't just have things disappearing without more thought, because they're in the neighbourhood plan. Are there any other works that need to be completed?
Not that I'm aware of. I have sent the final list of the non-designated heritage assets to Liz,
Okay.
with all the postcodes. I think she's going to have a go at
Mapping
plotting
it.
them on a map.
Very exciting. It'll be interesting to see where they all are. I mean, I know where they all are, obviously. I've driven to them all. But it'll be interesting to see them on a map. It will be interesting. Okay, so items for a future month's agenda. Do we have anything beyond just cracking on?
Gina sent out a new list for designated land for development a couple of weeks ago, and I think there were 9 removals off that list. I'd like to suggest another removal, if that's okay. It's one that I mentioned before, to do with Knott's Drive, and I asked you where the particular area of land was, and it's P040. And it's the play area and the substation below it. So I'd like that removing, if that's possible. I don't know if we want it on next month's agenda or want to deal with it tonight.
I think that the play area linked to, I'm sorry, I don't have the plan in front of me, so we can discuss it in the next meeting, absolutely. But I think the point of that was that there were 2 play areas that are adjacent to each other in the South Valley, and that we were looking at all of those Pendle land that was cleared in the 1930s. And I think that one of the play areas we did discuss in the past, I'm looking at other people and hoping they're going to be with me on this, we did discuss in the past that one of the play areas was superfluous, and therefore all of that together would form a potential development site.
Another option there's one where isn't the online registry, which is land is reviewed down the road.
Yes, that's a garage site. Yeah.
Is there a substation at that place?
I don't think so. And the owner is willing to sell and to develop. It will be a small scale site of, I think, 2 houses, something like that. Alice.
I just wondered if you could have maps of all this, we don't have a.
Yeah, it's on the website.
Yeah, so could we, are we having it in the next document?
Yes. Yes, so it was in the last document, and it will be in the next document. And Michael and I had a little chat this afternoon, and he said, do you know what, with it, again, using his experience, bringing forward many iterations of the next version is unhelpful and confusing. So when we get to coming to that next version, then we all see it at the same time. But, there's a map now, and there will be a map next. What's important, of course, as a neighbourhood plan is for us to be a designating neighbourhood plan, we have to have some plots in our bank to designate. And actually, they shouldn't be built on straight away, or we stop being a designated plan. So sites like Belgrave Street are probably ideal, because they they give us the opportunity to be a designating plan, but they're unlikely, they're possibly viable, but they're unlikely to be done next year. So we want to, it's a difficult balancing act that we are in. Okay?
Can I just ask what we think the timetable is then now? What are we sort of working towards? Because we've got to think about, full council has to review it and approve it, doesn't it, at some point? So
It's
we've
out
got
of
to-
our hands.
We'll almost think about when we want to do that for Regulation 15.
Yeah, it's out of our hands.
Right.
Because we have other people who are producing big parts of our evidence base, and we just have to be ready to act swiftly when it is delivered. And we don't know when it is going to be delivered, and we have asked. And they don't know. And they're not saying, are they, Gina?
They're not.
We've written them several quite stern emails, and we can't cross the line and be any. If you want people to do things for you, you shouldn't be over pushy. So we've been grateful, but at the same time, I mean, they are doing it for free to our advisory committee. We're not paying a penny piece for it. But unfortunately, that doesn't give us the leverage to say, we've paid you this amount of money, deliver it on the 5th of September.
We might need to start thinking about mentioning a timetable, though, to see how they fit into it. If other things where we are paying for it or we are doing it ourselves, and we do know that the MOT thing can be turned around really quickly, so that's a good step forward. So why don't we think about trying to encourage them as part of an overall timetable, rather than just ask them on their own, any ideas?
I think last time we asked for an indication of timeline. I think
We were knocked back. We were rebuffed.
Yeah.
We were rebuffed. Yeah.
Yes.
I think we're probably better off with the design code thing, because they roll those out all over the place. But it's good that we are the trailblazing town for the viability. It's great. I'm really proud of it. But at the same time, we're the first one. We're obviously the slowest.
Question to Michael in a way. The viability, though, we're looking at it to support some of the sites we're putting in as potential development sites. Do we actually have to have a final viability report? We don't quite know what it'll look like, do we? They'll have ideas to support things. Are they actually
It's
looking
different.
at
It's a
our
cocktail
sites?
for every single site.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you think we need that actually to be finished in the document? Or do we have to, or can we say that locality have put this together and it will support viability of each of these sites?
It might not.
I think now you've commissioned it, I think you do have to await the results. I think it'd be, I think it'd be unfortunate on two levels. One, it probably wouldn't go down very well with locality, and I think then secondly, if we were suddenly to produce a viability report after the submission consultation, I would imagine we'd get quite a lot of angry comments that, oh, isn't it amazing that this wasn't part of the consultation, but you've pulled this rabbit out of a hat, and that's not really fair. I think the only other route would be really to go back to locality and say thank you very much, but we don't want this, and rely on the previous work that you've had from ACOM and what Lichfields have said about Pendle's local plan. I think the best thing to do is just keep the pressure on to try and say,
Nicely.
look, you know, we do want to submit this plan as soon as possible, and this is one of the, you know, main things that's holding us up.
I mean, the position. Sorry, Paul.
Sorry. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, well, I was just wondering if there's a hybrid there where you could say to them, we very much would value this report and want to include it in the neighbourhood plan, but as a long stop, unless we get it by X date, we're going to have to make a decision as to whether to pull it, basically, and cancel it.
I will
Because
ring him.
otherwise you have absolutely no sway with them, do you?
We don't have any sway. We've swayed them to do it. That's the honest truth. I rang this bloke every single week for 4 months. I left him long and tortuous voicemails. Essentially, I actually think they've come up with this work package because I borderline stalked him. So we are really grateful that they're doing this, and we're really hopeful, and we can't be any more than that, that it solves some of the issues that we have with viability in Cone, which have led to a de facto greenfield first policy that wasn't what the NPPF intended. I will ring him and try my very best. Rather than send him another email, I'll ring him up and have a nice chat with him.
To be honest, when I spoke to him the other day, I did say that we are on a tight timeline and we are wanting to get it submitted as soon as possible.
I might leave it a week and then he gets me next week to do that. He must think that the pair of us are just harridans. In a sense, you've been shielded from the fact that we have been on this, because we know that the viability is really the most difficult part of our plan. While it's been lovely to look at nice pictures of Cone and whether we should have clip art and all of that, and all of that's worthwhile, the most difficult part of what we're doing is this. It would be great to have some of our sites with more imaginative thinking that everybody previously said weren't viable, made viable. We can only hope. We can only hope. On the webinar, one of the things, this is interesting to you, Paul, I think perhaps more than other people, and if Jonathan was here, this would be interesting. He was saying that using apprentices from college on site and having them fully supervised and trained on the site has led in other places to the same quality of work, but has reduced labour costs, which is a significant cost of the build, by 20%. So if the labour cost comes down 20%, then that portion of the bill makes that piece of land more viable. And that's just one of the examples that he gave. And there isn't sort of one solution for all of the sites. It would be like a little cocktail. This is how he's presented it to me. It would be like a cocktail of solutions that wouldn't be the same across our sites, to try to bridge what is perceived to be, what is at the moment, a gap. I pushed him in the webinar to say, is there any chance that the government would look again at the 20% profit margin that developers have to make in areas of lower viability, north of England or parts of the north of England? Would they consider a profit margin of, say, 5%? And take the viability off that? And he said that is not on the agenda at all. Forget about it.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, I agree with you wholeheartedly about how important the viability is. But at the end of the day, I still think that this committee would reach a point eventually, if that report isn't forthcoming, that it would be looking to make a decision, a very hard decision, as to whether to proceed with it or not. So maybe in your conversation, you could at least drop into the mix that there is some rumbling among committee members that there's not universal agreement that we should wait forever.
Okay. I'll do my very best. I won't do it this week. I will do it next week, so that he's had Gina 1 week and me the next week. But, you know. Oh, I don't think it's going to be a year's time.
Yeah, COVID can do really unpredictable things, as I know only too well in the building industry at the minute. So I'm just flagging up that, you know, with all their best intentions, I've no doubt they intend to deliver, but what if they don't, is what I'm suggesting.
Okay. All right. Splendid. Thank you very much, everybody, as the bell chimes. So, date and time of the next meeting, I think we will wait to hear from Gina on that point.
Are we thinking a couple of months and hope that we're closer in? Yeah? Okay, yeah. And, okay. Huh, okay, do our best. All right.